The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Elena Voss was wiping down the last table in her family's restaurant when the black SUVs pulled up outside. 3 of them, headlights cutting through the downpour like something predatory, and her stomach dropped before she even understood why. The front door opened without anyone knocking. A man in an expensive suit stepped in first, then another, then a third, and the restaurant that had smelled like garlic and her mother's tomato sauce for 30 years suddenly smelled like wet leather and threat. Her father came out from the kitchen, still holding a dish towel, and Elena watched his face go the color of old wax. He knew these men. He'd been expecting them, and he hadn't said a single word to her about it. If you've ever stood in a room and realized the person you trusted most had been keeping a secret that could destroy everything, hit the like button right now, because this story is going to hurt before it gets better. Subscribe to this channel and follow Elena's story all the way to the end, because what happens next will keep you up at night. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The man who came in last was different from the others. He wasn't large in the way bodyguards are large. He was lean, controlled, the kind of man who moved like he'd already calculated every exit and found none of them concerning. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, with a face that had been handsome once and had since been sharpened into something harder by years Elena couldn't begin to imagine. He wore no visible weapon. He didn't need to. The 3 men who'd walked in ahead of him were enough of a statement. He looked at her father. He didn't look at Elena at all. "Mr. Voss," he said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing that scared her most about it, how quiet it was, how completely unbothered. "I believe we have something to discuss." Her father's hands were shaking. The dish towel dropped to the floor and he didn't pick it up. "Matteo." Her father's voice cracked on the second syllable. "I told your people I needed more time. You've had more time." The man, Matteo, pulled out a chair at the nearest table and sat down in it, the way a person sits in their own home, unhurried, comfortable, like the restaurant already belonged to him. 3 extensions over 14 months, Vincent. At some point, time becomes a courtesy I can no longer afford. Elena stepped forward. She didn't plan to. Her body just moved, the way it always had when her father was drowning, and she was the only one close enough to pull him out. It had been that way since she was 12 years old, since her mother got sick, and the restaurant nearly folded the first time, and Elena had learned that the only reliable thing in her life was her own 2 feet on the floor. "Who are you?" she said. Matteo Ravencroft looked at her then. It was a brief look, 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it was the kind of look that took inventory. Not in a way that made her feel like an object, more like a man doing math in his head and coming up with an answer he hadn't expected. "You're the daughter," he said. "I'm the person asking who you are and why you're in our restaurant at 2 in the morning. Her father made a sound like a man trying to swallow glass. "Elena, please." "It's all right." Matteo's eyes stayed on her. "She deserves to know." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a single folded document. He placed it on the table between them, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and slid it toward her father without looking away from Elena. "Your father borrowed $340,000 from my organization over the course of 4 years, Matteo said. The debt, with interest, now stands at $482,000. He has no means to repay it. The restaurant is collateral that wouldn't cover a third of what's owed. And 2 nights ago he went to a man named Carver Dunn to see about borrowing more money to cover what he owed me." Elena stared at her father. "You went to Carver Dunn?" Her father looked at the floor. Carver Dunn was the kind of name that mothers in this city used to frighten children. Elena had grown up hearing it whispered in the neighborhoods east of the bridge, attached to stories about people who borrowed money and then disappeared. Going to Dunn to pay off a debt was the same as asking a second fire to put out the first. "He turned me down," her father said quietly. "Of course he turned you down," Elena said. "Dad." "He turned him down," Matteo said, "because I called him first." The room went very still. Elena looked at the man across the table. "You blocked him." "I did." "Why?" Matteo reached into his jacket again and produced a second document. He laid it beside the first. This one was thicker, multiple pages, paper-clipped at the corner, with the word agreement printed across the top in clean block letters. "Because I have a proposition for your family," he said, "and I preferred to present it without competition." Her father's hands were still shaking. Elena's were not. She'd learned a long time ago that shaking hands were a luxury she couldn't afford, and she pressed her palms flat against the sides of her thighs as she pulled out the chair across from Matteo and sat down. She looked at the documents. Then she looked at him. "What kind of proposition?" "I need a wife," he said. She almost laughed. The sound came up into her throat and she swallowed it back down, because his face hadn't moved an inch and she understood that he was not joking. "You're serious?" "I don't make social calls at 2 in the morning." "You need a wife," she said again, flat. "And you came to us." "I came for a specific reason, yes." "Which is what? You thought a restaurant family in debt was romantic?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement that she'd said something worth noting. "The reason is on page 2 of the second document," he said. "I'd recommend you read it before you decide whether to be offended." Elena pulled the agreement toward her and flipped to the second page. She read it once. Then she read it again, slower, because the first time she'd convinced herself she'd misread it. She hadn't. The paragraph on page 2 stated, in the careful language of a legal document drafted by someone very good at their job, that within the past 6 months, information had been passed from inside her family's circle to a competing organization, specifically to a man named Dorian Thrace, who ran operations east of the city and who had been systematically attempting to dismantle the Ravencroft network from within. The information was operational, it was damaging, and according to the investigative summary attached, the source of that information was someone with regular access to the Voss family's daily routine. Elena set the document down very carefully. "You think someone in my family is leaking information about your organization?" "I don't think it," Matteo said. "I know it. What I don't know is who." "And you want me to, what, spy on my own family?" "I want you to be present," he said, "in my house, at my events, in the conversations that happen around the people who know your family. A wife moves through spaces that an investigator cannot. People say things in front of a woman they trust that they would never say in front of a man they fear." He paused. "And you have something that takes years to manufacture." "What's that?" "A face that people believe." Elena sat with that for a moment. Outside, the rain was louder now, hitting the windows in uneven patterns. Her father hadn't moved or spoken since the second document appeared. He was still standing near the kitchen door with his hands loose at his sides, and Elena recognized in his posture the specific quality of a man who has run out of roads. She had been covering for him her whole life. Every time the restaurant had a bad month, she'd worked doubles. Every time he'd made a bad decision, she'd absorbed the consequences and rebuilt around them. She'd given up a scholarship to art school at 20 because he'd needed her here. She'd stayed when she should have left. She'd stayed because he was her father, and because the restaurant was her mother's dream, and because some people are built to be the ones who hold things together even when the things aren't worth holding. She had never once asked what he'd done to deserve the holding. She asked now. "Dad," her voice came out steadier than she expected. "How much of this did you know?" Her father closed his eyes. "Which part?" she said. "The part where you borrowed nearly $500,000 from people who would eventually show up at our door? Or the part where someone in our lives has been selling information and you didn't think to mention it?" "Elena, which part, Dad?" "Both," he said. It came out like something being dragged. "I knew about both." She didn't yell at him. She wanted to. She thought about her mother, who had worked in this kitchen until she couldn't stand anymore, who had built this place from a rented space and a secondhand stove, who had made Elena promise before she died that she would keep the family together. Elena had held that promise like a splinter for 12 years, and now she was sitting across a table from a crime boss at 2 in the morning because her father had borrowed money from the wrong people and somehow made it worse. She looked at Matteo. "If I agree," she said, "what happens to my family?" "The debt is erased. The restaurant stays in your father's name. My organization ensures that no competing group approaches your family for leverage." He met her eyes. "You have my word on that." "Your word," she said. "I'm aware of what that sounds like coming from a man in my position," he said. "But in my experience, the only currency more durable than money is reputation. I don't offer my word often. When I do, I keep it." Elena looked at the documents on the table. She thought about what it would feel like to say no. She thought about what happened to people whose debts to men like Matteo Ravencroft went unpaid. She thought about her younger brother, Marco, who was 17 and believed their father was just a struggling restaurant owner who'd had some bad luck. She thought about all of it in approximately 6 seconds. I want two things, she said. Matteo waited. My brother doesn't know any of this, she said. Not the debt, not the investigation, not the arrangement. As far as Marco is concerned, I'm getting married because I want to. Agreed. And I want full access to whatever information your organization has about the leak. Not summaries. Not what you decide I should know. The actual files. Something in his expression changed. Not dramatically, not the way emotions moved across the faces of people who'd never learned to hide them. It was more like a subtle recalibration, a slight shift in the weight of his attention. That's an unusual condition. You just told me I have a face people believe, she said. I can't use it effectively if I'm working blind. Either I'm your partner in this or I'm your prop. I don't do prop. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. Outside, one of his men shifted position, and the leather of his jacket whispered against the door frame. All right, Matteo said. He picked up a pen from his jacket pocket. A simple one, the kind you buy at a drugstore, which she noted because she hadn't expected it. And he signed the document. Then he slid it across to her. Elena picked up the pen. She held it over the line for exactly one breath. Then she signed. Her father made a sound that might have been relief or grief. Elena didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the document, on her own signature drying in the restaurant's low light, and she thought, this is either the smartest thing you've ever done or the thing that finishes you. She didn't know which. She wouldn't know for a long time. 3 days later, she moved into Matteo Ravencroft's house. It was not what she'd expected, though she'd tried to have no expectations at all, because expectations were things she'd stopped trusting in her mid-20s when reality had proven itself consistently indifferent to them. The house was large, a converted estate on the north end of the city, 4 stories of pale stone and dark wood set behind iron gates and mature trees. It looked like money that had been made quietly and held for generations, which she understood to be exactly the impression it was meant to give. Her room was on the 3rd floor, not the same floor as his. She'd noted that immediately and filed it without comment. A woman named Clara, who managed the household staff, showed her around with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before and drew no conclusions about the circumstances. Elena liked her for that. The first week was a negotiation conducted almost entirely in silence. Matteo came and went at unpredictable hours. When he was home, he was in his office on the 2nd floor, and the door was almost always closed. They ate dinner together twice, not out of warmth, but because, as Matteo had explained before she moved in, public perception begins at home, and staff talk. He was correct about that. Elena had worked in service long enough to know that the people who poured your coffee saw more than anyone else in the room. At dinner, Matteo ate without looking at his phone. He asked her questions, not personal ones, not right away. He asked about the restaurant, about the neighborhood, about the kind of customers her family had served for 30 years. She answered honestly because lying required energy she didn't want to spend, and because she'd already decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it her way. On the 3rd night, she asked him a question in return. What happened to your last relationship? He looked up from his plate. She watched him decide whether to answer. Her name was Petra, he said. She was involved with my organization in ways I didn't fully understand until it was too late. She passed information to a rival family. When I found out, I ended the relationship. And her? She's alive, he said. She's in another city. I'm not a man who punishes people for self-preservation. Elena thought about that. Are you telling me that because you want me to feel safe, or because it's true? Both, he said. When they're the same thing, I don't see the need to pick. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't charm. It was something more functional than either, a kind of precision that she found herself, against her better judgment, respecting. The files arrived on the 4th day. 2 men she hadn't seen before brought them in a locked case and left it outside Matteo's office. He handed her the key that afternoon with no ceremony, no preamble. Everything we have, he said, organized by timeline. The earliest known contact with Dorian Thrace's network is dated 14 months ago. She took the key. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. If you find something I've missed, I want to know within the hour, not when you've built a theory, when you find the thing. And if what I find implicates someone in my family, He didn't hesitate. Then you tell me that first. Elena nodded. She took the case to her room, sat down on the floor with her back against the bed, and began to read. She read for 6 hours. What she found on page 47 of the fourth folder made her stop breathing for a moment. A photograph, surveillance quality, grainy but clear enough. A man she recognized sitting across a diner table from someone she didn't. The man she recognized was not her father. It was Marcus Fell, her father's accountant, who had been handling the restaurant's books for 11 years, who had attended her mother's funeral and held her father's arm at the graveside, who had called Elena last Christmas to wish her a merry one and asked how she was getting on. She sat with the photograph for a long time. Then she took it to Matteo's office and knocked. He opened the door. He looked at her face, then at the photograph in her hand. "Fell," she said. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't name. Not surprise, not quite. More like the specific feeling of a puzzle piece landing in the right place. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I suspected him for 8 weeks," Matteo said. "I couldn't confirm it." "Because you needed someone on the inside," she said. "Someone Fell would never suspect." "Yes." She handed him the photograph. "There are 3 more in the file. Meetings over a span of 10 months. He's been at it longer than your people tracked." Matteo took the photograph. He looked at it carefully. Then he set it on his desk and looked at Elena. "You found this in 6 hours," he said. "I knew where to look," she said. "I grew up in that restaurant. I know every face that walked through it." She paused. "Fell introduced my father to a financial restructuring firm 4 years ago. I thought at the time I thought it was him helping. Now I think he was the one who opened the door to the debt in the first place." Matteo was very still. "You think Fell engineered your father's dependency?" "I think someone wanted my father financially desperate enough to be easily manipulated," she said. "And I think Marcus Fell was the person who made that happen." A silence fell between them. Not uncomfortable, not yet. The kind of silence that meant something was shifting. Matteo looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face before. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated than that. The look of a man who has been alone in a particular way for a long time and has just, unexpectedly, encountered someone who understands the language he thinks in. He closed the file. "We need to be careful how we move from here," he said. "I know," Elena said. "If Fell realizes we're onto him, he'll pull back. We need him to think he's still safe." "Which means," Matteo said, "we need to appear publicly to be exactly what we claim to be." Elena looked at him. "A happily married couple." "A convincingly married couple," he said, with the faint edge of self-awareness that she was starting to recognize as the closest he came to humor. "I'm not sure I'm capable of happy." "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to be convincing." He almost smiled. She left his office and walked back to her room and stood at the window for a while, looking out at the city lights and the rain that had finally, after 5 days, begun to slow. She thought about her mother, who had believed that every person was 2 people, the one they showed and the one they protected. She'd said it was not deception. She'd said it was survival. Elena had never fully understood what she meant. She was beginning to. The week ended quietly. But on Sunday evening, while Elena was in the kitchen making herself tea because she couldn't sleep and the rest of the house was silent, one of Matteo's security men, a broad-shouldered man named Reeves, who had barely acknowledged her existence since her arrival, came in and stopped in the doorway. "Ma'am," he said. She looked up. "I just wanted to say." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with the words. "We know what you're doing, the people in this house. We know you didn't ask for this." Another pause. "You've been decent to the staff. Most people don't bother." Elena looked at him. "Thank you, Reeves." He nodded once and left. She stood in the kitchen alone and let herself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the full weight of everything she'd walked into. The debt. The arrangement. The files. The photograph. Marcus Fell. Her father's face when she'd signed the document. The way Matteo had looked at her across the dinner table on the 3rd night, like he was adding something up and coming to an answer he hadn't planned for. 1 minute. Then she put it away. She had work to do. And somewhere out in the city, Marcus Fell was still moving freely, still sitting across diner tables from dangerous men, still believing he was invisible. He wasn't invisible anymore. Monday came in cold and gray, and Elena was already awake before the house stirred. She'd been up since 4, sitting at the small desk in her room with the files spread across every available surface, cross-referencing dates from Fell's meeting photographs against the restaurant's financial records she'd pulled from her own files, copies she'd kept on her laptop out of habit, the kind of habit that comes from growing up in a family where paper trails had a way of disappearing when things got difficult. Outside, the rain had finally quit, leaving the city washed and brittle under a sky the color of old concrete. By 6:30, she had a timeline on a single sheet of paper. 11 contacts between Marcus Fell and Dorian Thrace's network over 10 months. Each one preceded, by 2 to 3 weeks, some specific piece of operational disruption inside the Ravencroft organization. A shipment intercepted, a meeting leaked, a contact who had suddenly become unavailable. She'd mapped it with straight lines and dates, the way her mother used to map the restaurant's ordering schedule against the weekly revenue. Patterns, her mother had said, are just truth that hasn't been spoken yet. She took the timeline downstairs at 7. Matteo was already in his office. The door was open, which surprised her. In the 9 days she'd been in the house, she'd never seen it open before 8. He was standing at his desk with his back to the door, jacket off, reading something in his hand, and when she knocked on the frame, he turned without the flinching reflex of a man caught off guard, which told her something about how he'd trained himself over years she could only guess at. He looked at the paper in her hand. She laid it on the desk in front of him and pointed to the first entry. "Look at the timing," she said. "Every contact happens roughly 2 weeks before a disruption in your operations. That's not coincidence. That's a processing window. Fell reports something, it moves through 1 or 2 intermediaries before it reaches Thrace, and by the time it lands, enough time has passed that the connection looks random." Matteo looked at the timeline. I was quiet for long enough that she heard the house beginning to wake around them. Footsteps on the floor above, the distant sound of the kitchen starting up. "The Hartwell shipment," he said. 3 weeks after the second meeting in the file, she said. "Yes." He set the paper down. He pressed 2 fingers to the edge of it like he was keeping it from moving. "I lost 4 men redirecting that shipment," he said, and his voice was completely level, which was worse than if it had shaken. Elena didn't respond to that directly. She pointed to the 6th entry on the timeline. "This one I can't place. The date is April 9th, but I couldn't find a corresponding disruption in any of the files you gave me, which means either the disruption hasn't happened yet, or it happened and your people didn't connect it to a leak." Matteo picked up the page and read the April entry again. His jaw moved once, tightening and releasing. "April 9th, he said. "That was 2 weeks before my second-in-command told me we had a clean quarter. No incidents." He said it quietly. Elena understood what that meant before he finished the sentence. "Silas." Matteo set the page down. "Silas Vale reported no incidents for the quarter ending late April," he said, and his voice had gone to a register she hadn't heard before. Flat in a way that was different from calm. Flat in the way that concrete is flat. "He told me himself, sat across that desk and told me it had been the cleanest stretch we'd had in 2 years. And you believed him." It wasn't an accusation. She kept her voice neutral, clinical, the same voice she used when a delivery came in short, and she had to walk the supplier through exactly what was wrong and why it mattered. Matteo heard the neutrality, and something in his face shifted in response to it, acknowledging that she wasn't attacking him, which maybe meant more to him than if she'd been gentle about it. "I believed him," he said. "Silas has been with me for 11 years. "I know," she said. "That's what makes him effective." Matteo was quiet again. He moved to the window and stood with his hands behind his back, looking out at the iron gates and the wet stone of the driveway. Elena watched him and did not fill the silence. She'd learned early in life that some silences were working silences, the kind where a person was not waiting but thinking, and interrupting them was worse than useless. Finally, he said, "I need to be certain before I move on this." "I know that too. Because if I move on Silas without certainty, and I'm wrong, I destabilize the organization from the inside." He turned from the window. "Which is exactly what Thrace wants." "Then we get certainty," Elena said. "We use Fell." He looked at her. "Fell doesn't know I've seen the photographs," she said. "He doesn't know this file exists. As far as he knows, I'm just the woman your boss married under strange circumstances who has no particular reason to look at his accounting history. She pulled out her chair at the desk, a gesture she hadn't consciously planned, and sat down. I want to meet with him. In the restaurant. In a context that makes complete sense, where nothing about it would raise his attention. What context? My father needs his accountant, she said. I'm going home this week to check on the family. Fel will be there. He usually comes by on Wednesdays to go over the books. I'll be present. I'll be friendly. I'll ask him about his week and tell him how strange my new life is, and watch every single thing his face does. She looked at Matteo. He's been lying to people he cares about for 10 months. He's not a trained operative. He's an accountant who made a deal he can't undo. That kind of man has cracks. Matteo studied her face. You sound very certain of that. I know men who make bad deals they can't undo, she said. I grew up next to one. A beat of silence. Then Matteo nodded once. Wednesday, he said. I'll have someone in the vicinity. Don't, she said. If there's anyone outside who looks like yours, Fel notices and closes up. I go alone. The muscle at the side of Matteo's jaw moved. She could see him working through the calculation, the risk against the benefit, the discomfort of sending her without coverage against the reality that coverage would ruin the whole thing. A wire, he said. That's the condition. You wear a wire, and if I hear anything that sounds like a threat to you, we move regardless of the investigation. Elena thought about it. Fine, she said, but I control the feed. If I cut it, you pull back. If you cut it, I come in regardless. They looked at each other across the desk. You're very difficult to negotiate with, Elena said. So I've been told, he said, and there it was again. That faint, reluctant thing at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. She arrived at the restaurant on Wednesday just after noon. Her father was in the kitchen. She could hear him before she saw him. The sound of a pot being set too hard on the burner, the specific rhythm of a man working to avoid thinking. And she stood in the dining room for a moment before she went back, pressing her palms flat against her thighs the way she always did when she needed to be steadier than she felt. He looked older. It had been less than 2 weeks since she'd signed the documents, but her father had aged in the interval in the subtle way that guilt ages people, around the eyes, in the slight forward drop of the shoulders, like he was carrying something he couldn't put down and had stopped trying to. Elena. He said her name the way people say things they've been rehearsing. Hi, Dad. He came around the counter and hugged her. She let him. She hugged him back because he was her father, and because she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that love and anger were not mutually exclusive, that you could hold both at the same time and not have either one cancel out the other. How are you? He asked. Managing, she said. You? Getting through it. He released her and looked at her face the way he used to when she was a teenager coming home later than she'd said she would, trying to read whether she was okay without asking the question directly. Is Ravencroft treating you? He's treating me fine, Dad. Her father nodded. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he accepted it because the alternative was asking a question that might get an answer he couldn't bear. Marcus Fell arrived at 12:40. He came through the front door with the easy familiarity of a man who had been coming to this restaurant for over a decade, pulling his coat off before he was fully inside, calling out a greeting to Elena's father from across the room, setting his briefcase on the table nearest the window out of long habit. He was 61 years old with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses and a face that had probably always looked trustworthy, which Elena now understood was not a coincidence but a professional asset. He saw Elena and stopped mid-motion. Just for a half second, the briefcase clasp clicked under his fingers. Then he smiled. Elena, I didn't know you were coming by. Last minute, she said, and smiled back. Dad said you'd be here, and I wanted to see a familiar face. The last 2 weeks have been... She let out a breath that was mostly genuine. A lot. Fell relaxed. The shoulders came down. The smile became something warmer. I can only imagine, he said. He came and embraced her, the practiced warmth of a family friend, and she let him, noticing over his shoulder the way his briefcase was angled slightly away from her. Instinctive, protective of what was inside it. Sit with us, she said. Dad's making the soup. I never say no to your father's soup, Fell said. They sat. Her father brought food out and joined them, and for 40 minutes it was an almost normal Wednesday lunch in a restaurant that smelled like home. Elena talked about the adjustment of living in a large house, about how quiet it was at night, about missing the city noise she'd grown up with. She asked Fel about his other clients, about his daughter who was finishing her nursing degree in another city. Fel talked. I was good at it, relaxed, engaged, the warmth that came from 11 years of genuine affection for this family, sitting right on top of whatever else was living inside him. Elena watched him the way she used to watch the dining room during a busy service, not focusing on any single point, letting the whole picture come to her at once. It came to her slowly. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands even though it wasn't cold. The way his eyes moved to the front window approximately every 4 minutes. Regular enough to be habitual, irregular enough that a person not watching wouldn't catch it. The way he asked, very casually, in the middle of a story about his daughter's hospital rotation, "How's Ravencroft settling in?" Having a new person in the house must take some getting used to for him. "He's private," Elena said. "Takes his time with things." "I imagine he does," Fel said. "Man in his position has to be careful." "Very careful," Elena agreed. She picked up her water glass. "He actually mentioned you, Marcus." The change was microscopic. 2 degrees of stillness entering the posture. The coffee cup held a fraction tighter. "Did he?" Fel said. "I was reviewing some of the restaurant accounts. Just routine, understanding the family finances, and your name came up as the one who'd recommended the restructuring firm 4 years ago." She let a beat of natural-sounding uncertainty enter her voice. "What was their name? Kelmore something?" "Kelmore and Associates," Fel said. His voice was steady. The hands were not, quite, but close enough that her father wouldn't have noticed. "Right," Elena said. Matteo was just curious about the history, wanted to understand where the debt originated. She shrugged, the gesture of a woman passing on information with no particular investment in it. "I didn't know much about it, honestly. I was out of the restaurant loop by then." "It was a standard restructuring package," Fel said. "The restaurant was having a rough quarter. I recommended several options and your father chose that one." His eyes moved to her father. "Vincent, you remember how it went." Her father nodded slowly. He was looking at his soup. "You laid out the options," he agreed. "Matteo might want to talk to you directly at some point," Elena said, watching Fel's face. "Just to close the loop on the paperwork." A full second of silence. "Of course," Fel said. "Happy to talk to him any time." But his hand, moving to set the coffee cup down, missed the edge of the saucer by a centimeter. The cup tapped against the table with a small click, and Fel smiled apologetically and corrected it, and Elena smiled back, and the lunch continued, and neither of them acknowledged what had just happened. She was back at the house by 4. Matteo was waiting for her in the hallway. Not pacing, he wasn't a man who paced, but standing with his weight forward, which was as close to impatient as she'd seen him. "I heard the feed," he said. "Then you know." "He rattled," Matteo said. Fel rattled on the Kelmore question. "He rattled on the Matteo question," Elena said, pulling her coat off. "Not the firm." "He can explain the firm. He's had 4 years to build a story for it. What he can't explain is why Matteo Ravencroft is reviewing it now, 2 weeks after a marriage that Fel probably knew was about the leak." She hung her coat. "He'll reach out to someone tonight, Thrace's people, or whoever his handler is. He'll need to know whether it's time to run." Matteo was quiet. "Which is what we want," Elena said. "We need him to move. When he moves, he creates a trail. And if he runs before we can follow it?" "He won't run," she said. "He's been at that restaurant for 11 years. His whole identity is tied to this family. Men like Fel don't run. They double down and tell themselves they can manage it. He'll reach out, try to assess the threat, and decide he still has room to operate." She paused. "But we have maybe 72 hours before his fear gets bigger than his ego." Matteo looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention she was starting to recognize as his version of being impressed. "How confident are you?" "Confident enough," she said. "Not certain. He's been doing this for 10 months without being caught. He's not stupid." "No," Matteo agreed. "He's not." He moved toward his office, then stopped in the doorway and turned back. "You did well today." Elena looked at him. "I didn't do it for the compliment." "I know," he said. "That's why I gave it." She went upstairs and sat on her bed and let herself shake for exactly the time it took to drink half a glass of water. Her hands had been steady in the restaurant, through all 40 minutes of it, through the Kelmore question and Fell's almost miss with the coffee cup. But the steadiness was a thing you borrowed from somewhere, and eventually it came due. She let it come due now, in private, where no one was watching. Then she set down the glass and went back to work. The 72 hours moved quickly and wrong. Fell didn't reach out to Thrace's network. He reached out to someone else. Matteo's communications team, a tight operation of 4 people who worked in a windowless room on the building's basement level, intercepted a call on Thursday evening. Not to any number they had associated with Dorian Thrace, to a cell registered to a burner, which in itself was unremarkable. What was remarkable was the tower the signal had pinged through, inside the Ravencroft building perimeter. Matteo showed Elena the report at 11 p.m. Thursday. She read it twice. "Someone inside made the call," she said. "Or received it," he said. "The direction isn't clear, but it went through our tower." Elena set the report down. She felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, exactly. More like the particular cold that came with understanding that the map you'd been using had been wrong. "You think Fell has a contact inside your organization?" "I think it's possible." "Who has access to that tower?" 37 people, Matteo said. "Security, senior staff, my operations team." He paused. "Silas." The name sat between them. "You need to check Silas's movements Thursday evening," Elena said. "I'm already aware of that," he said, and his voice had gone to that flat register again. The concrete flat one that she understood now meant he was managing something that was costing him more than he was letting show. 11 years. She understood what that number meant to him, even if he hadn't said it directly. You didn't build something with a person for 11 years without them becoming part of the architecture of your life. Discovering that architecture had been compromised from the inside was a different kind of loss than losing a stranger. "Matteo." She used his name deliberately. She'd been calling him nothing in the house, which was a conscious choice, and she watched him register the shift. "I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Ask." "Is there any version of this where you hold back on Silas because of your history with him? Because if there is, I need to know now so I can plan around it." The silence that followed was long enough to mean something. "No," he said finally. She held his gaze. He held hers. "Okay," she said. Friday morning came and went. By afternoon, Matteo's communications team had identified the burner phone's call pattern. 6 contacts over 4 months, each lasting less than 90 seconds, each made from a different location in the city, each pinging through either the Ravencroft building's tower or a tower within 3 blocks of it. The discipline of the spacing, the brevity of the calls, the rotating locations, this was not Marcus Fell's operating style. This was someone who had been trained, or someone who had been doing it for much longer than 10 months. Elena was in Matteo's office when the updated report came in. She read it over his shoulder, close enough to catch the smell of his coffee going cold on the desk. And when she reached the final notation, the 6th call, placed from inside the building, time-stamped at 9:47 on the previous Saturday evening, she went very still. Saturday evening, she'd been in the house. Matteo had been in the house. The senior staff had been off for the weekend except for the security rotation and the 2 people Matteo kept on call. And Silas Vale had stopped by at 9:30 for a briefing that ran, according to the gate log, until 10:15. She straightened up. "He was here." Matteo had already seen it. "How was here?" she said again, and it wasn't a question. "He was inside this building when that call was made." Matteo set the report down very slowly, with the controlled precision of a man managing the gap between what he felt and what he could afford to do with it. He moved to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders carry the weight of 11 years coming apart in a single Saturday evening. She did not tell him she was sorry. That wasn't what he needed. She understood that about him by now. That sympathy offered too quickly felt like pity, and pity was the one thing Matteo Ravencroft was constitutionally unable to receive. She said, "How do you want to handle Monday's briefing?" He turned from the window. "You know about the Monday briefing?" "Clara mentioned it. Weekly operations review, 9 a.m., your senior staff." She kept her voice level. "If Silas attends and you behave differently toward him, he'll know. He's been reading you for 11 years. A muscle in Matteo's face moved. "I'm aware." "So you go in normal," she said. "You sit across from him and you run the meeting the same way you always do. You give him nothing. I've been doing this a long time, he said, and there was an edge to it, not directed at her, but present. I know you have, she said. I'm not questioning your capability. I'm saying I'll be at that meeting. He looked at her. Wives don't attend operations reviews. This one does, she said. Silas knows I'm here. He knows I'm moving through this house. If I show up at a meeting and seem to belong there, it reads as you trusting me, which is a normal development for a marriage that's been going on for 2 weeks. She met his eyes. And if Silas is the one who's been managing this whole thing, Fell, the leak, Thrace, he's going to want to read me. He's going to want to know what I know. Which is dangerous. Which is useful, she said. Let him try to read me. I'm better at this than he expects. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. In the weak afternoon light coming through the window, she could see the exhaustion that lived beneath the controlled surface of his face. Not the sleepless kind, but the older kind. The kind that accumulates over years of holding things that would crush other people. Monday, he said. Monday, she agreed. Saturday night, Elena woke at 3 a.m. to her phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Marco, her brother. She sat up and answered before it could ring a second time. Marco. Hey. His voice was thin and off, the way it got when he was trying not to sound scared. I didn't want to call you, but I didn't know. There's a guy outside the restaurant. He's been out there since midnight. Dad's freaking out, and I didn't know if I should call the police or... Don't call the police, she said. She was already standing, already reaching for her jeans. Don't let Dad go outside. Lock the back as well as the front. I'll call you back in 3 minutes. She went directly to Matteo's room and knocked hard. He opened the door in under 5 seconds, which told her he hadn't been fully asleep either. She told him in 2 sentences. He had his phone in his hand before she finished. He made one call, quiet and fast, and then looked at her. My people will be there in 8 minutes. The man outside won't be a problem. What does that mean? It means he'll leave, Matteo said flatly, without injury, if that's what you're worried about. She called Marco back and told him help was coming and to stay inside. Her brother's breathing on the other end of the line was the particular breathing of a teenager trying to hold himself together, and she used the same voice she'd used with him when he was 7 and had a nightmare. Steady, matter of fact, letting the steadiness do the work that words couldn't. When she hung up, Matteo was standing in the hallway watching her. Thank you, she said. He shook his head slightly, as if the gratitude was unnecessary, which was not the same as not accepting it. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and understood, with a clarity that had the cold weight of certainty, that the man outside her family's restaurant was not a coincidence. It was a message. Someone was telling her, and through her, Matteo, that Elena's family was still exposed, still reachable, that whatever protection the marriage was supposed to provide had limits, and those limits were being tested deliberately. She thought about the burner call, the Saturday night timing, Silas Vale's face, which she hadn't yet seen, which existed in her mind only as a name and a pattern of behavior. She thought about Marcus Fell's hand missing the saucer by a centimeter, and she thought about her father, who was in that restaurant right now, probably standing in the kitchen with all the lights on, doing the thing he'd always done when things got bad, moving, keeping his hands busy, refusing to be still because being still meant feeling it. She pressed her back against the headboard and watched the ceiling and understood that they were past the point of careful moves and controlled timelines. Whoever was on the other side of this, Silas, Thrace, whoever had sent a man to stand outside her family's restaurant at midnight, they were not going to wait for her to be ready. They were already moving, and somewhere between the filing cabinet in Matteo's office and the yellow light of a restaurant kitchen 3 miles away, the last boundary between Elena's old life and whatever was coming next had already been crossed. She didn't sleep after the call. She sat on the edge of her bed until the sky outside the window went from black to the particular dark blue that came just before dawn, and she went through everything she knew in the order she'd learned it, the way she used to balance the restaurant's books, starting from the oldest entry and working forward, looking for the place where the numbers stopped making sense. Marcus Fell, Kelmore and Associates, the forged debt, the 10-month pattern of leaks, the burner calls from inside the Ravencroft building, Silas Vale's Saturday visit. A man standing outside her family's restaurant at midnight, doing nothing except being seen. That last part bothered her most. Not that someone had been sent, but that they'd been sent to be noticed. If the intent had been harm, Marco wouldn't have had time to call. The man would have come through the door, not stood on the sidewalk, which meant the man was a signal, not a threat. Someone was sending a message, and the message was, "We know where your family is, and we know you know we know." That kind of precision didn't belong to Marcus Fell. Fell was a conduit, a man who opened doors. What had walked through the door he'd opened was something organized enough to run a parallel communication channel inside Matteo's own building, disciplined enough to keep calls under 90 seconds for 4 months, patient enough to wait almost a year before showing its hand. By the time the sky had gone gray enough to read by, Elena had stopped thinking about Fell entirely. She got dressed and went downstairs. Matteo was in the kitchen, not the breakfast table, the kitchen itself, standing at the counter with a mug in both hands, looking at nothing in particular. He'd changed since she'd knocked on his door at 3, but barely. Same dark clothes, same controlled stillness, except that the stillness had a different quality to it this morning. Compressed rather than settled. The way a structure looks the same from the outside, even after something internal has shifted. He looked up when she came in. "Your brother is fine," he said. "The man outside left at approximately 2:15. My team tracked him 6 blocks east before he got into a car they're running now." "And?" "Plates were clean, professionally so." He set the mug down. "Not Fell's operation." No, she said. "Fell doesn't have an operation. He has a handler." Matteo was quiet. "It was a demonstration," Elena said. "Someone showing us that our perimeter isn't as clean as we thought, that they can reach people we care about without crossing any of our lines." She moved to the counter and poured herself coffee without asking where anything was, because she'd been in the house long enough to know. "Silas?" "Probably," Matteo said. "Not probably," she said. "The call came from inside this building on Saturday night during his visit. The demonstration came 2 nights later. That's a sequence, not a coincidence." She turned to face him. "He's escalating because he knows we're looking." "He doesn't know that." "He suspects it," she said. "And for a man like Silas, suspicion is enough to move." She drank her coffee and watched Matteo's face do the thing it did when he was thinking through something he didn't want to say. "What?" "Monday's meeting," he said. "I've been considering whether it's the right move." "It's the only move," she said. "If we change the routine now, he'll know for certain instead of suspecting. We need to give him a normal Monday and then close the trap before he has time to realize it's a trap." "And if he's already closed it from his end?" Elena set down her mug. "What does that mean?" Matteo picked up a folder from the counter. She hadn't noticed it when she walked in, which told her he'd been holding it before she arrived and had set it down deliberately. He opened it and slid it toward her. She looked at the top page. It was a financial document, account transfers. She saw the date on the first entry, and her stomach dropped 3 inches. "That was generated this morning," Matteo said. "My financial team flagged it at 5 a.m. 4 accounts connected to my legitimate holdings have been accessed, not drained, touched. Small amounts, moved in patterns consistent with someone mapping the network structure." He paused. "Someone with internal authorization codes." Elena looked at the accounts. Then she looked at the authorization signature on the access log. She had to read it twice. The signature was hers. The authorization code attached to the account access was her own, the code she'd been assigned when she moved into the house. A standard security measure that had been explained to her by Clara on the first day as something routine for household members. She'd never used it. She hadn't even memorized the full number. "This isn't me," she said. "I know," Matteo said. "You know," she repeated. She looked up at him. "How long have you known?" "I've known since 5:15 this morning that the access wasn't made from any device registered to you and that the timestamp places it at 4:47 a.m., at which point my security system shows you in your room." He said it without defense or apology. "I also know that your code was cloned." "Cloned," she said. "How?" "Your code is stored on the household network. Someone with deep access to our internal systems pulled it and used it to create a paper trail connecting you to the account mapping." He closed the folder. "Someone is building evidence against you." The kitchen was very quiet. Elena set both hands flat on the counter. The cold of the stone came through her palms and she focused on it, the specific grounding reality of cold stone, while she worked through what he'd just said. Someone inside the organization had pulled her authorization code from the household network, had used it to access financial accounts, had done it at 4:47 in the morning, in the gap between the man leaving the restaurant sidewalk and the city waking up. The timing was surgical. This was not improvised. This had been prepared. He's been planning this longer than 10 months, she said. Yes. The leak, fell, the debt. Those were the visible layers, she said. This is the real play. I want to be able to show that you married someone who was accessing your accounts in the middle of the night. Someone who came into your house and immediately began mapping your financial structure. She looked at Matteo. He's going to make me the leak. Matteo didn't answer, which was its own answer. If I'm the source, she said, then everything I've uncovered about Fell, about the burner calls, about Silas, all of it looks like misdirection, like I was pointing at other people to protect myself. She heard her own voice coming out flat and clear, and she was aware distantly that she was handling this better than she should be, that the flatness was the sound of a person moving too fast to feel the ground. He's not just trying to protect himself. He's trying to use me to destroy you. Yes, Matteo said again. When did you start suspecting this was the shape of it? He was quiet for a moment. When you found the timeline, he said. How cleanly it mapped. How quickly you found the photographs in the files. He held her gaze. It occurred to me that it was arranged to be found. Elena went very still. You thought I planted the timeline. For approximately 6 hours on Monday morning, he said. Yes. The honesty of it landed without softening. She absorbed it. And now? She said. The account access was made at 4:47, he said, from a device that isn't yours, using a code that was pulled from the network without your knowledge. If you were running the operation Silas is setting you up for, you wouldn't have made that access from a traceable clone. You'd have used your own device and made it look routine. He paused. You're too precise to be that sloppy. That's not a compliment, she said. That's just logic. I know, he said. I'm not in the habit of complimenting people to reassure them. She picked up her coffee again. Her hands were steady. She was beginning to understand that the steadiness wasn't a performance. It was something structural, something built into her over years of being the person in the room who couldn't afford to fall apart. She didn't love it exactly, but she recognized it. Monday still has to happen, she said. Monday still has to happen, he agreed. Monday morning arrived the way bad days often did. Ordinary on the surface, light coming through the windows at the same angle it always did, Clara moving through the house with her usual efficiency, coffee appearing on the kitchen table with no ceremony. Silas Vale arrived at 8:55. Elena heard him come in from upstairs. His voice in the front hall, relaxed, familiar, the comfortable register of a man who had walked into this house hundreds of times. She stood at the top of the stairs for a moment and listened to it, calibrating. Then she came down. He was standing with Matteo near the office doorway, a leather portfolio under one arm, and he turned when he heard her on the stairs. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the composed, pleasant face of someone who had spent decades being exactly as visible as he wanted to be. His eyes moved over her with a warmth that was indistinguishable from genuine unless you were specifically looking for the calculation underneath it. Mrs. Ravencroft, he said, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Silas Vale. Elena, she said, coming off the last step. She put her hand out and he shook it, firm, brief, the handshake of a man comfortable with the gesture. Matteo's mentioned you. All good things, I hope, Silas said, and smiled, and glanced at Matteo with the easy intimacy of long familiarity. Mostly, Matteo said, and his voice was perfect, warm enough, dry enough, exactly the register of a man who has said this line 100 times. They went into the office. Elena went with them. Silas's attention moved to her once as she pulled a chair to the side of the room, not at the table, not positioned as a participant, just present. And she saw him decide she was decorative. She watched him make that decision in real time, in the half-second rearrangement of his posture, and she filed it. The meeting ran 40 minutes. Operations updates, 2 personnel matters, a summary of activity from the previous week's accounts. Elena sat in her chair and said nothing and watched Silas Vale conduct himself with the competence of a man who had genuinely built something over 11 years, which was what made him effective and what made him dangerous. He wasn't performing. He was real. The competence was real. The loyalty had simply been redirected somewhere she couldn't yet fully see. About 25 minutes in, Silas mentioned the accounts. One thing I wanted to flag, he said, opening his portfolio. There was some unusual access to the secondary holdings early Sunday morning. Nothing missing, nothing unauthorized on the surface, but the pattern was worth noting. Matteo looked at him. What kind of pattern? Mapping activity, Silas said. He produced a single page and slid it across the table. Low level, but consistent with someone building a picture of how the holdings connect to each other. He paused. The authorization code attached to the access is registered to the household. The pause after that sentence was short enough to be missed. Matteo looked at the page. Get your team to run a full trace, he said. I want source device, timestamps, the whole line. Of course, Silas said. He made a note in his portfolio. I'm sure it's nothing alarming. New household additions sometimes generate unusual access patterns without realizing it. He didn't look at Elena when he said it. He specifically did not look at her. Elena sat with her hands in her lap and her spine against the chair back, and looked at the wall to the left of Silas's shoulder and breathed at her normal rate. The meeting ended at 9:40. Silas packed his portfolio, said something to Matteo about the following week, and moved toward the door. As he passed Elena, he paused. I hope you're settling in well, he said. The warmth in his face was extraordinary. She understood now that it was a gift, that warmth, not a deception exactly, but a tool so thoroughly integrated into his personality that he probably couldn't have separated it from himself if he'd tried. I am, she said. Thank you. He left. The front door closed. The house settled. Elena counted to 15, then she stood up and looked at Matteo. He's going to move within 24 hours, she said. He put the account access on the table himself, preemptively, before anyone could bring it to him. He controls the narrative, makes it look like his own team found it, and the trace his people run will come back implicating me. She kept her voice low, even though the house was empty of anyone who'd listen. He has the evidence ready. He's been building it for weeks. All he needed was to present it in the right setting. Matteo was looking at the door Silas had walked out of. He wanted you in that meeting. He needed to see how I reacted when he put the accounts on the table, she said. He was reading me. And what did he see? Nothing, she said. That's going to worry him. She turned to face Matteo fully. A woman who's been caught should react. Discomfort, deflection, something. I gave him a wall. He's going to go home and think about that wall. Matteo looked at her. She could see him recalibrating, not doubting her, but updating, the way an experienced navigator updates their position against new landmarks. He'll accelerate, Matteo said. Tonight or tomorrow, she said. Yes. It was tonight. Matteo was shot at 7:43 p.m. while leaving a building 6 blocks from the house. The call came to Elena's phone at 7:51. A man named Torres, head of Matteo's security rotation, delivered the information in the flat, deliberate cadence of someone trained to convey bad news without inflection. Mr. Ravencroft was hit once in the left shoulder during an ambush outside the Denmar building. He was conscious and stable. He was being transported. Elena heard every word. She stood in the hallway with the phone against her ear and the specific cold of profound shock moving through her chest. Not the sharp cold of surprise, but the slow cold of something that had always been possible becoming suddenly actual. Where is he being taken? She said. Torres gave her an address. Not a hospital. A private medical facility. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. The drive was the worst 20 minutes she'd had in recent memory, and she'd had some bad ones. She sat in the back of the car that Torres had sent and looked out the window at the city moving past and felt, underneath the ice-cold function that was keeping her operating, something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not for the plan, not for the investigation, not for what Silas might do next while Matteo was down. Fear for Matteo. She held that feeling in her chest and didn't look at it too directly, the way you didn't look directly at something that would take time to understand. The facility was a converted brownstone near the east edge of the city. She was through the door and down a corridor and into the room within 4 minutes of arriving. He was sitting up. That was the first thing. He was sitting up on the table with his jacket gone and his left sleeve cut away, while a doctor worked with clean efficiency on his shoulder and 2 of his security men stood near the door. The wound was high on the shoulder. She could see the bandaging going in, and the controlled way Matteo was holding the arm, weight distributed to compensate. He looked at her when she came in. "You're here," he said. "Of course I'm here," she said. The doctor glanced up and returned to work. Elena moved to the side of the table and stood close enough to be present without being in the way. And she looked at Matteo's face, the exhaustion that he wasn't trying to hide right now, the pale quality underneath the dark complexion, the way his jaw was set against something that wasn't going to quit for several hours. "How bad?" she said to the doctor. "Clean through," the doctor said. "Missed the artery. He'll have restricted movement for several weeks and significant pain for several days, but there's no structural damage that won't heal." Matteo was watching her face. "Stop reading me," she said. "I'm not." "You are," she said. "You want to know how I found out, and how quickly I came, and whether the speed means something." She held his gaze. "It means I was scared, that's all." Something moved in his expression. It was brief and went away quickly, but she saw it, the particular look of a man encountering something he'd stopped expecting. "Elena?" "Not now," she said quietly. "Later. Right now I need to know who set the ambush," he told her. Not everything, the doctor was still in the room, but the shape of it. 3 men, a coordinated approach from 2 directions, the kind of tactical precision that required advanced knowledge of his movements. His driver had been the only one to return fire. The building he'd been leaving was the site of a meeting with a legal contact that had been on his schedule for 2 weeks. His schedule, which Silas managed. She looked at him and he looked at her, and they both understood it at the same moment, and neither of them said it out loud. The doctor finished and stepped back. He gave instructions, antibiotics, movement restrictions, follow-up in 48 hours, and left the room with the professional discretion of someone paid very well to have a short memory. Matteo's security men moved outside the door. They were alone. "He knew your schedule," Elena said. "Yes." "He moved faster than I predicted," she said. "I said 24 hours. It was 12. "He saw your face in that meeting," Matteo said. "No reaction to the account access. He understood what it meant." "That I knew he'd planted it," she said. "That you were ahead of him," Matteo said, "or close enough to make the risk unacceptable." He shifted on the table and the movement cost him something. She saw it in the compression of his mouth. "He needed me incapacitated before you could act." Elena turned away from him. She moved to the small window at the end of the room and looked out at a narrow alley and a brick wall and a strip of city sky already going dark. Matteo, shot. The financial accounts mapped in her name. Silas moving 12 hours early. Her father's restaurant watched at midnight. All of it accelerating, all of it moving faster than her ability to stay ahead of it, all of it converging on a single point that she could feel approaching with the particular inevitability of a thing that has already happened and is just taking time to arrive. She turned around. "I need to go to my father," she said. "Elena, he's the exposure point," she said. "Silas sent someone to the restaurant Saturday to establish that he can reach Marco. Now you're down and I'm implicated in the accounts, and Silas is in control of your operations for the next 24 hours at minimum while you recover." She moved back to the table. "My father is not safe. Marco is not safe. And Silas knows that the fastest way to break me is not to come after me directly. It's to go through them." Matteo looked at her. "If you go there, you're exposed." "I'm already exposed," she said. "My team can cover the restaurant." "Your team's loyalty just got a question mark on it," she said, and kept her voice even as she said it because it was true and it needed to be said. "You don't know yet who inside this organization has been working for Silas. You know it's not the communications team, or they'd have buried the burner evidence. But beyond that," she shook her head, "I don't want your team covering my family until you've run them all, which takes time you don't have tonight." Matteo was quiet for long enough that she heard a car pass outside the window. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. "The recording." She waited. "In the files I gave you," he said, "there was a folder marked Archive. You may not have reached it. It's toward the back of the 4th case." He paused. "It contains a recorded conversation, audio, dated 11 months ago." Another pause, the kind that came before something a person had decided to say and was still half regretting. "The recording is of your father's voice." The room went very quiet. "Talking to Silas," Matteo said. She stood very still. She felt the cold moving through her again. Not the shock cold from the phone call, something older and deeper. The cold that came from understanding that the ground under a thing you'd been standing on was not as solid as you'd built your life assuming it was. "My father," she said. "Yes." talking to Silas. At a meeting in the restaurant, Matteo said. 11 months ago. Silas approached your father directly, before the contact with Thrace's network. Your father told him about the debt situation, about the financial pressure. Silas offered to help. He stopped. The recording captures your father agreeing to allow Silas access to information about the restaurant's regular contacts with my organization. Elena looked at the floor. Then she looked up. How long have you had this? She said. Since before the marriage, Matteo said. The words came in and she absorbed them, and the absorption took longer than she expected. Before the marriage, she said. Yes. So when you came to the restaurant, she said slowly, and put the contract on the table and told my father that someone in his circle was leaking information. I already knew it was him, Matteo said. Yes. She heard her own breathing. It was steady. She couldn't tell if that was strength or shock. You used me, she said. I used the situation, he said. It's not the same thing. It is the same thing. She stepped back from the table. You knew my father was the source. You knew the marriage was necessary to get me inside the organization in a way Silas wouldn't question. Because if Elena Voss is here because she's Matteo's wife, no one wonders why she has access to the files. She's just a woman moving through her husband's house. She heard her voice going somewhere she wasn't sure she could bring it back from. You didn't need me to find the leak. You needed me to be the thing that made you finding it look natural. Elena, was any of it real? She said. The files you gave me, was the evidence in them genuine or was it arranged for me to find? It was genuine, he said. Every document, every photograph, every... How do I know that? She said. How do I know any of it? You knew about my father for 11 months and said nothing. You built a marriage on a foundation of selective information and expected me to... She stopped. She pressed one hand flat against the cold wall and stood there for a moment, not looking at him. The anger was real. She let it be real. She didn't perform it, and she didn't suppress it. She stood in the middle of it and let it be what it was, which was the feeling of a person who had trusted a calculation and discovered the calculation had variables she hadn't been given. Your father wasn't malicious, Matteo said. His voice had gone quiet. He was desperate, and Silas found him at the right moment. He gave Silas one piece of information, and then Silas had leverage, and it compounded from there. He shifted on the table, and she heard the breath that cost him, short, controlled, absorbing it. I didn't use the recording against your father because doing so would have given Silas everything he needed, confirmation that I was on to him, a reason to accelerate before I was ready. So you held it, she said, and you used me instead. I brought you in because you were already in danger, he said. Dorian Thrace's organization had identified your family as a pressure point against me before I ever came to your restaurant. Thrace was 3 days from making contact with you directly. Not your father, you. The marriage wasn't only about the investigation. It was the fastest way to move you inside a protective structure before Thrace could reach you. Elena turned around. He was watching her with the careful, exposed look of a man who had just put down something heavy and was not certain what happened next. You could have told me that from the beginning, she said. Yes, he said. I could have. Why didn't you? A long silence. Because I didn't know you yet, he said, and I was accustomed to working with information the way I work with everything else, releasing it when necessary, holding it when possible, controlling the flow. He paused. And because telling you your father had betrayed my organization in the same conversation where I was asking you to marry me seemed... He stopped. Seemed like too much to ask of a person. Elena looked at him. The anger was still there. It didn't dissolve. It didn't need to. But underneath it, there was something else now, something she recognized as the beginning of a more complicated understanding. He had kept her father's recording because using it would have destroyed the investigation. He had kept her ignorant of it because he hadn't known her well enough to know how she'd carry it. Both of those things were true. Neither of them excused it. Both of them explained it. My father needs to know that I know, she said. Not yet, Matteo said. Yes, yet, she said, because Silas is going to use him. If my father doesn't know the full shape of what he walked into, Silas will reach him before we do and use whatever hold he has to pull another piece of information, or worse, to use Marco as leverage directly. She moved back toward the table. I need to go to the restaurant. I need to tell my father the truth, and I need to do it tonight before Silas gets there first. Matteo looked at her. She could see the cost of the shoulder in his face now, the paleness, the controlled breathing, the energy going to maintain the surface he needed to maintain. "You can't stop me," she said, not unkindly. "No," he said, "I can't." She picked up her coat from the chair where she'd dropped it coming in. At the door she stopped. "The recording," she said. "Is it the only thing you've held back?" Matteo held her gaze across the length of the room. "No," he said. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame and understood that she was standing at the exact point her mother had been talking about. The place where the person you showed and the person you protected were both entirely visible, and you had to decide what to do with the scene. She walked out. The car ride to the restaurant took 11 minutes. Elena spent the first 4 of them watching the city move past the window without seeing it, her coat still in her lap where she'd dropped it when she got in, her hands loose on top of it. The driver, one of the 2 men Torres had confirmed were clean after a fast but brutal internal check in the 2 hours following the shooting, said nothing. He understood, or had been told, that this was not a ride that required conversation. She spent the next 4 minutes deciding how to tell her father. There was no good version of it. She'd known that the moment Matteo said the word recording. The question was not how to soften it. Some things couldn't be softened without becoming lies. But how to deliver it fast enough and completely enough that her father understood the full shape of what he'd walked into, before panic narrowed his thinking to the point where he stopped being useful. She needed him functional. She needed him honest. She needed him to understand that Silas Vale was not a man who left loose ends, and that Vincent Voss, who had shaken the man's hand 11 months ago in his own restaurant and made a desperate agreement, was currently one of the loosest ends Silas had. The last 3 minutes she spent thinking about the thing Matteo had said at the door. No, just that. One word, carrying the weight of everything it implied. Not the recording, not the investigation, not the account access. Something else. Something he'd held back that was bigger than all of it, or different from all of it in a way she couldn't yet see the shape of. She'd walked out. She'd had to walk out, because there was a limit to how much a person could absorb in a single hour and stay operational, and she had already hit that limit. But the word followed her into the car and sat beside her for 11 minutes. No. The restaurant's lights were on. She was out of the car before it fully stopped, across the sidewalk and through the unlocked front door. Her father never remembered to lock it until he was ready to leave for the night, had never once in 30 years broken that habit. And into the warm smell of garlic and oil and the specific tired air of a kitchen that had been running since morning. Her father was at the bar. Not drinking, Vincent Voss was not a drinking man, but sitting on one of the stools with both elbows on the counter and his head in his hands, which was worse, somehow, than if he'd had a glass. Marco was in the back. She could hear the sound of dishes, the specific rhythm of a 17-year-old doing cleanup work with headphones in, oblivious. Good. She needed him oblivious for a little longer. "Dad." Her father looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and his face had the collapsed quality of someone who had been holding something too long and had recently stopped being able to hold it. He looked at her, and something in his expression cracked open. Not all the way, not into words, just the beginning of it. "I know about the recording," she said. The sound he made was not quite a word and not quite a breath. It was the sound of a man who had been waiting for a specific knock on a specific door for 11 months and has finally heard it. "Sit down, Dad," she said. "We don't have a lot of time." She told him what she knew, all of it, the timeline she'd built, the photographs of Fell, the burner calls from inside the building, Silas's appearance at Monday's meeting and the account access that morning, the ambush that had put Matteo in a private medical facility with a bullet wound and a restricted arm. She told it fast and without decorating it, the way she used to go over the restaurant's financials with him when things were bad, clean, direct, no softening, because her father was a man who could handle hard truths better than he could handle watching someone try to protect him from them. When she finished, the restaurant was quiet except for Marco's faint music from the kitchen. Her father said, "He told me it was a small thing." "I know." "Silas came in here, sat where you're sitting, and told me it was just background information, that Ravencroft already knew most of it, that it was just confirming." He pressed his hands flat on the bar. They were shaking, but slowly, the deep tremor of a man in his 60s whose body had been carrying too much stress for too long. "He said it would help get the debt managed." "He lied," Elena said. Silas has been managing this for longer than your debt. The debt was a tool he used to find people who were desperate enough to be useful. You weren't the only one, but you were the one who gave him the access he needed to get inside Matteo's organization in a way that looked clean. Her father looked at her. Elena. His voice broke on it. I didn't know. I know you didn't, she said. But I need you to listen to me right now because the fact that you didn't know doesn't make you safe. She leaned forward. Silas is accelerating. He tried to have Matteo killed tonight. That didn't work. Which means his next move is pressure. On the people around Matteo who are vulnerable. That's you, Dad. That's Marco. She held his gaze. I need you and Marco out of this building tonight. There's a place I can send you. I'm not running, her father said. This isn't running, she said. This is surviving long enough to be useful. Elena, Marco is 17, she said. It came out quiet and flat, and it landed the way she intended it to land. Her father went still. He's 17, she said again. And Silas already sent someone here Saturday night. Not to hurt anyone, to demonstrate that he could. The next time he sends someone, the demonstration will be different. She watched her father absorb it. So you and Marco are going to call it an early night, and you're going to go to Aunt Sylvia's in the north of the city, and you're going to stay there until I call you, both of you. Her father looked at the bar, at his hands, at the restaurant around him, the 30 years of it, the tables and the light fixtures and the wall where her mother's photograph still hung in its wooden frame. Okay, he said. She went into the kitchen and told Marco they were going to Sylvia's. Marco, headphones around his neck and a dish towel over his shoulder, started to argue, the automatic resistance of a teenager to a plan he hadn't been part of making. And Elena looked at him with the specific look that had been shutting down arguments in this family since she was 16 and he was 2, and he stopped. Get your stuff, she said. He got his stuff. She was back in the car 6 minutes after she'd arrived. She called Torres. Matteo's location, she said. Is he still at the facility? He insisted on returning to the house, Torres said, 20 minutes ago. Of course he did. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. Is the house secured? 3-man rotation, 2 on the gate. It's as clean as I can make it on short notice, given, Torres paused, given the current situation with personnel. Given that they didn't know yet how far Silas's reach went into the security rotation. I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said. She was there in 10. Matteo was in his office, standing, which told her the shoulder was running on adrenaline and stubbornness because it should not have allowed him to be standing without significant pain. His jacket was back on, left side draped rather than properly worn, the sleeve hanging empty. His face was composed. His eyes were not. He looked at her when she came in, and the first thing he said was, Your family? Safe, she said. On their way to my aunt's. She pulled the door shut behind her. Silas is going to move tonight. He doesn't have another window. You're down but mobile. The accounts trace is going to come back wrong for him when your communications team runs it properly. And I'm still in this house. Every hour he waits, the situation gets harder for him. I know, Matteo said. So what are we doing? He moved to the desk. With his right hand, his left barely functional, he opened the center drawer and pulled out a small drive. He set it on the desk between them. Everything I have on Silas, he said. 11 years of it. Contacts, account structures, communications that go back to the beginning. He paused. Including the parts he doesn't know I kept. Elena looked at the drive. What parts? When I first brought Silas in, Matteo said, I was 26 years old and he was 49 and he knew things I needed to know. I was genuinely useful and I was genuinely grateful. He kept his eyes on the drive. But I was also my father's son. And my father taught me one thing that overrode everything else. Never trust gratitude to last. Always document. He picked up the drive. There are recordings on here that Silas made himself. Of meetings he ran, agreements he brokered. He was meticulous about documentation. He used it to manage his own people. He set it down again. He didn't know I had a parallel archive. Elena picked up the drive. It was light in her hand, smaller than a thumb, less than 2 inches of plastic and metal. Is it enough? To expose him? Matteo said. Yes. To stop him tonight? He paused. Not by itself. Then what stops him tonight? The question sat in the room. Matteo looked at her. I was waiting, he said. For you to come back and tell me what you found at the restaurant. My father confirmed everything, she said. Silas approached him first. Before Fel, before Thrace, before any of it. My father was the entry point. She set the drive back on the desk. Which means Silas has had 11 months to build whatever he's building inside this organization, and the only person who can confirm the full shape of it from the inside is someone Silas trusts enough to have told. Matteo nodded slowly. Fel, he said. Fel, she said. Fel is scared. He's been scared since Wednesday when I mentioned Kelmore. He's been running his own calculations about whether Silas is still a safe bet or whether the whole thing is coming apart. She picked up the drive again. If I show him this, not all of it, but enough of it, he'll understand that Silas is finished. And a man who's been holding a secret for 10 months and is looking at the door finally opening is going to walk through it. You want to flip Fel, Matteo said. I want Fel to understand that the only version of the next 12 hours where he's not sitting in a room explaining himself to Silas's people is the version where he's sitting in a room explaining himself to us. She looked at Matteo. Where is he right now? Matteo made a call. 70 seconds of conversation, clipped and precise, and then, he's at his apartment, hasn't left since Wednesday. He's been waiting to see which way it falls, she said. That's actually good. It means he's still calculating, not running. She was already moving toward the door. I need a car, and I need whatever contact you have in the city attorney's office. The city attorney's office? Matteo said. If Fel is going to walk through the door, he needs to walk toward something, she said. He needs to know that whatever he gives us comes with something in return. Matteo was quiet for a moment. There's a woman named Hargrove, he said, assistant city attorney. She's been trying to build a case against Dorian Thrace for 2 years without enough to move. Call her, Elena said. Tell her I'm coming to see Marcus Fel and that what Fel gives us will be enough to move on Thrace's entire network. She paused at the door. And tell her I need it in writing before I walk into that apartment. Matteo looked at her with that look. The one she'd first seen across the restaurant table 18 days ago when she'd asked for the files and he'd recalibrated. It was the look of a man discovering repeatedly that the person across from him was operating at a level he hadn't fully accounted for. You planned this on the drive, he said. I planned it in the car on the way to the restaurant, she said. The drive back was for second-guessing it. She met his eyes. Make the call. He made the call. The written confirmation from Hargrove's office came through on Matteo's secure line at 9:41. Elena read it on her phone in the car, had Torres's man read it back to confirm nothing had been altered in transmission, and was at Fel's building by 10:10. The apartment was on the 8th floor of a building that had been expensive once and had settled into dignified middle age. She rode the elevator alone. The wire was off. She'd removed it herself before getting in the car, because this conversation required the specific intimacy of a room where no one else was listening and both people knew it. She knocked. 40 seconds. Then the sound of movement. Then the door opened on a chain. Fel looked at her through the gap. He was in his pajamas, blue, cotton, the kind of pajamas that made a 61-year-old man look exactly his age. He hadn't been asleep. His eyes were alert in a way that was different from rested. Elena, he said. His voice was careful. Marcus, she said. I need 10 minutes. After that, what you do is up to you. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating behind the wire-rimmed glasses. Then he closed the door, slid the chain, and opened it fully. His apartment was neat the way anxiety is neat, everything in its place as a way of managing something that couldn't be managed. He'd been at the kitchen table before she arrived. A cup of tea, barely touched. Papers she didn't look at directly. Sit down, Marcus, she said. He sat. She sat across from him. She put the drive on the table. He looked at it. His hands, wrapped around the tea mug, went still. 11 years, she said. Silas kept records of everything he did, every agreement, every contact, every instruction he gave. He was meticulous. She tapped the drive once, lightly. He didn't know Matteo kept a parallel archive. So everything Silas documented, thinking it was his leverage, is on here. She looked at Fel's face. Including the meeting where you were introduced to Dorian Thrace's network. Fel set the mug down. What do you want? He said. His voice was rough. I want you to tell me everything Silas told you, she said. His full plan. what he's doing tonight, where his people are, and what his exit looks like. I want every conversation you can remember and every name he used. She leaned forward slightly. And in exchange, I have written confirmation from the Assistant City Attorney's Office that what you provide will be treated as material cooperation in a case against Thrace's organization. You won't walk away clean, Marcus, but you'll walk away. Fell looked at the drive. His jaw worked once. He's going to kill Matteo tonight, Fell said. The words hit the room like something physical. Second attempt, Elena said, keeping her voice flat. Not an ambush this time, Fell said. He has someone inside the house, has had someone inside for 3 months. He looked up at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had been living with something terrible and has finally, with the specific relief of a person drowning who feels the surface beneath their feet, decided to stop. A man named Decker, security rotation. Silas recruited him 8 months ago. Elena's chest went cold. Decker. She ran the name through what she knew of the house security. The faces she'd cataloged in the first week. The names Torres had given her as confirmed clean. Torres had confirmed the communications team. He'd confirmed 2 of the gate men. He hadn't run the full security rotation. He hadn't had time. She was on her phone before Fell finished his next sentence. Torres picked up in 2 rings. Decker, she said. Where is he right now? A pause. Second floor corridor rotation started at... Get him out of the building, she said. Right now. Not detained, not confronted. Out. You tell him there's a shift change and you walk him to the gate and you keep him there. If he resists, why would he... He's Silas's, she said. Do it now, Torres. Don't give him a reason to move first. She heard Torres shift, the quick adjustment of a man recalibrating fast. On it, he said. And the line stayed open as she heard him moving, heard him speak to someone in the flat professional tone that meant he was treating it like a routine instruction rather than a threat response. She looked at Fell. What else? She said. The ledger, Fell said. Silas has a ledger, physical, not digital. It contains evidence on everyone connected to the Ravencroft operation. Politicians, attorneys, city officials. He's been building it for years. Tonight, if the second attempt on Matteo succeeds, Silas planned to use it to position himself as the new power. Anyone who objected would find their name in circulation. Where is it? She said. He keeps it at the Denmar building, Fell said. Third floor, room... The Denmar building, she said. That was where Matteo had been ambushed leaving that evening. Silas had known Matteo would be there because Silas had managed his schedule. And the building where the ambush happened was also the building where Silas kept his final leverage. She stood up. Marcus, she said. The city attorney's office is expecting your call. Her name is Hargrove. You call her tonight, right now, after I leave, and you tell her everything you told me and more. Every name, every date, every meeting. She looked at him. If you don't call within the hour, the deal closes. Fell looked at her. He looked older than he had at the Wednesday lunch. He looked like a man who had been carrying something for 10 months and has just put it down and discovered, with the specific vertigo of sudden lightness, how heavy it had been. I'm sorry, he said. About your family. About all of it. Elena looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. She walked out. In the elevator, she called Matteo. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone, which was not a thing she'd seen him do before. Decker, she said. Second floor. Torres is moving him now. I know, Matteo said. Torres called. A pause. You got Fell. Fell is calling Hargrove right now, she said. The ledger is at the Denmar building. Third floor. She heard the elevator doors open and she stepped out into the lobby. Silas is going to find out Decker was pulled within the hour. When that happens, he moves, Matteo said. He comes here or he runs. There's no third option. He comes here, she said. He needs the ledger to have any leverage on the people he's spent years cultivating. If Matteo Ravencroft is still alive and the operation is still standing, the ledger is the only card Silas has left. She pushed through the building's front door into the cold night air. He'll come for it. The Denmar building is 6 blocks from the house, Matteo said. I know, she said. A pause. She could hear him thinking. You're going there, he said. I'm going there, she said. Elena. The word came out with a weight she hadn't heard in his voice before, not commanding, something rawer than that. I need the ledger before Silas reaches it, she said. If he gets there first, he burns it or he moves it, and we lose the only evidence that connects all of it. Thrace, the politicians, the city officials. Everything Fell told me means less without the physical ledger. She reached the car. Torres's man was already out of the driver's seat, looking at her. I'm going to the Denmar building, she told him. He looked at his phone, looked at her, nodded. Elena, Matteo said again. His voice had the quality of a man choosing his words with a precision that was costing him something. I'll be on the phone the whole way, she said, and Torres's man is with me. That's not... He stopped. She heard him exhale, short, controlled, the breath of someone managing the gap between what they wanted to do and what they were able to do. The building code for the third floor is 4471. The room is marked storage. She got in the car. You knew about the ledger. I suspected it existed, he said. I didn't know the location until 30 seconds ago when you said Denmar and I understood where he'd keep it. What else? She said. The pause was exactly long enough to tell her something. Tell me in the car, she said. We're moving. The Denmar building was 4 minutes away through night traffic that had thinned to the late-hour version of itself. Delivery vehicles, cabs, the occasional pedestrian moving fast against the cold. Torres's man drove without asking for the address, which meant Matteo had already sent it, which meant Matteo had already accepted that she was going regardless of whatever he might say. She kept the phone to her ear. Talk, she said. The other thing I held back, Matteo said, and his voice had gone to a place she'd only heard once before, at the medical facility, when she'd pressed her hand against the cold wall and made herself breathe. It's about the recording, your father's recording. What about it? I told you I had it before the marriage, he said. That's true. What I didn't tell you is why I didn't move on your father the way I moved on every other security breach I've encountered in 11 years. A pause. The car turned a corner and she saw the Denmar building ahead, a mid-rise office building with the particular blank-faced anonymity of a structure that had housed 50 different businesses over 40 years. The reason I didn't move on your father is that I spent 3 months before coming to your restaurant watching your family. Not investigating, watching, the way you ran the restaurant, the way you covered for him without appearing to. Another pause. The night I decided to come to you with the marriage proposal, instead of simply handling your father the way I would have handled anyone else, I'd watched you close the restaurant alone at 1 in the morning and sit outside on the curb in the cold for 11 minutes before you went back inside. She was very still in the back of the car. I don't know what you were doing out there, he said. I don't know if you were tired or grieving or just needed the air, but I watched it, and I understood something about the weight you'd been carrying, and I made a decision that I had not made since I was a very young man, which was to do something for a reason that wasn't entirely strategic. The car stopped in front of the Denmar building. Matteo, she said. Go get the ledger, he said. Come back. She got out of the car. The building's lobby was empty at this hour. A security desk with no one at it, lights on the automatic overnight setting, the specific hollow quiet of a building that was not expecting anyone. She punched 4471 into the elevator panel, wrote it to 3, found the corridor half lit and silent. The room marked storage was the 4th door on the left. She went in. The room was the size of a large closet, shelving units on 3 walls, filing boxes stacked with the organizational logic of someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what they needed to be able to find quickly. On the lowest shelf, behind a stack of ordinary-looking archive boxes, was a flat metal case the size of a laptop bag. No lock, just a simple latch, the kind of container that looked like nothing specifically because it was meant to. She opened it. The ledger was real, leather-bound, handwritten in a small, precise hand that she recognized from the portfolio Silas had carried into Monday's meeting. Hundreds of pages, names, dates, amounts, agreements, 40 years of a man's careful, patient accumulation of the kind of information that turns powerful people into obedient ones. She was reaching for it when she heard the elevator. She turned. Footsteps in the corridor, more than one person, moving fast. She looked at the ledger in the case. She looked at the door. She calculated the distance between the two and the time the footsteps were giving her and understood, with the cold precision that had been her most reliable tool for the last 18 days, that she was not going to make the door before whoever was in that corridor made it first. She took the ledger out of the case. She shoved it inside her coat, against her body, and buttoned the coat over it. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message to Matteo, Denmar 3RD, not alone, and hit send, and had just enough time to push the phone into her coat pocket before the storage room door opened and Silas Vale walked in. He was not alone. Two men came in behind him, neither of them large, but both of them with the specific quality of men who had done this kind of thing before. Silas himself was in his coat, his silver hair slightly disordered, his composed face carrying something she hadn't seen there on Monday morning. The tight, high-strung energy of a man who has realized his timeline has collapsed and is moving on instinct. He saw her. The composed face held for 1 second, then something shifted in it. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who has been solving an equation for months. Finding, at the final step, that one of the variables was in the wrong place the whole time. "Elena," he said. She stood in the middle of the room with both hands visible at her sides. The ledger pressed against her ribs beneath her coat, the leather edge digging into her side with every breath. "Silas," she said. He looked at the open metal case on the shelf, at her coat, at her face. "You have it," he said. "I found the room," she said. "I was looking for files related to the account access you set up in my name. Matteo thought the source documentation might be here." She kept her voice even. "I didn't find what I was looking for." It was not a good lie. She knew it wasn't a good lie. Silas knew it wasn't a good lie. But it bought her 8 seconds while he decided how to respond. And 8 seconds in a room this size with two men behind Silas and a phone message already on its way to Matteo was the most valuable currency she had. "You sent the message," Silas said. He'd seen the phone go into her pocket. He was quick. She'd understood that from the moment she'd watched him run a meeting while systematically destroying the organization he was sitting inside of. "Matteo knows I'm here," she said. "Matteo Ravencroft," Silas said, "is at his house with a hole in his shoulder and half his security rotation pulled pending investigation." He took 1 step toward her. Not aggressive, measured. The step of a man who has done the math and found it satisfactory. "He's not coming, Elena. Not in time." She looked at him. "Put your hands out," he said. She didn't move. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I need the ledger, and I need to be gone before Torres decides to stop being reasonable. That's all this is." "That's not all this is," she said. "It doesn't have to be." "You shot Matteo," she said. It came out flat, and she heard in the flatness everything she'd compressed for the last 3 hours. The 11-minute drive, the facility, his face when she'd come into the room, the thing he'd said about watching her on the curb in the cold, all of it compressed into 2 words that she delivered with the full weight of all of it. "You sent men to shoot him in a building you knew he'd be in because you put him there." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "And the man outside my family's restaurant Saturday night." "A message," he said. "I needed you to understand that the people you cared about were exposed. I wasn't going to—" "You were absolutely going to," she said. "You just hadn't needed to yet." Silas looked at her with something that might, in another life, in a man who'd made different choices, have been respect. "You're very good at this," he said. "Better than I expected." "Everyone keeps saying that," she said. "The ledger," he said. His voice went quieter. "Please." She looked at the 2 men behind him. She looked at Silas. She looked at the open door beyond them, the corridor, the elevator, the building's empty lobby below. She reached into her coat, and the lights went out. Every light in the building, corridor, room, the distant glow of the lobby visible through the open door, cut to black in a single instant, and the darkness was total the way darkness only is in a building that has no windows in its interior rooms, and for 3 seconds the storage room was nothing but breathing and the sound of 2 men shifting their weight and Silas saying something sharp in the dark that she didn't fully catch. Elena moved, not toward the door, away from it, 1 step back, 2, until her back met the shelving unit on the far wall, and she pressed herself against it and went completely still and controlled her breathing down to the minimum and waited. The lights had gone out from the outside. Someone had cut them from the outside. Matteo's people. She pressed her back against the cold metal shelving and held the ledger against her ribs and listened to the dark. The dark lasted 47 seconds. She counted them, not deliberately. Her mind did it automatically, the way it did things under pressure that she hadn't asked it to do, the counting running underneath her controlled breathing like a second track, keeping time while the rest of her stayed very still against the shelving unit with the ledger pressed against her ribs and the cold metal at her back and the sound of 3 men somewhere in the blackness of that small room. Silas moved first. She heard him. 2 steps toward where she'd been standing, a hand touching empty air, a breath that wasn't quite an expletive. One of the men behind him shifted right, the other went left toward the door, which was the logical move. Secure the exit, control the room. She heard the door connect with the wall as he pushed it fully open, the faint, marginally lighter quality of the corridor's emergency backup power beginning to bleed in from somewhere down the hall. She didn't move. On the 47th end, the corridor filled with light, flashlight beams, 3 of them, moving fast from the elevator end. Voices. Torres's voice, clipped and direct. The sound of men who knew what they were doing entering a space they'd already mapped. Silas said, "Don't." She couldn't see his face. She heard the word and understood that it was addressed to his own men. Not a surrender, not yet, but a reading of the room, the calculation of a man who had been doing this for 40 years, deciding in real time whether the math still worked. The math didn't work. Torres's people came through the door fast and professional, and in 30 seconds the room had flashlight beams crossing it in every direction, and Silas Vale was standing in the center of it, with both his men against the wall and his composed face doing the things she'd watched it do on Monday morning. Holding, and then the very subtle rearrangement of a man who has closed one door and is looking for the next one. There was no next one. Elena stepped away from the shelving unit. She moved into the intersection of 2 flashlight beams and let them find her, and Torres said her name with the specific relief of a man who had been hoping for the best and prepared for the worst, and she said, "I have it." She meant the ledger. She meant all of it. Silas looked at her across the room. The composed face was still there. It would probably always be there, she thought, because some people build their face the way they build a wall, deliberately and over decades, and no single night could knock it down. But underneath the composure, in the precise quality of his stillness, she could see the thing that no amount of construction could fully conceal. The specific look of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated, and who knows it, and who will be calculating the exact moment and manner of that underestimation for the rest of his life. He didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to him. There was nothing left to say between them that would mean more than the ledger pressed against her ribs and the 3 men against the wall and the flashlight beams cutting through the dark of the Denmar building's 3rd-floor storage room. Torres's men walked Silas out. She heard it happen behind her, the footsteps, the door, the corridor, and she stood in the middle of the empty room and took 3 full breaths and let the shaking come. Because it always came eventually, the body's accounting for everything the mind had deferred, and she'd learned a long time ago that it was better to let it happen in a moment of privacy than to carry it forward and have it arrive at the wrong time. 3 breaths. Then it was done. She took out her phone. 1 message from Matteo, sent 6 minutes ago. "Building is secure. Come back." She came back. The house was different when she walked in, not in any physical way, the same hallway, the same light, Clara's absence and expected quiet at this hour. But the atmosphere had changed the way a room changes after a window has been open in it. Something moved through and replaced with something cooler and cleaner, but not quite comfortable yet, not quite settled. Matteo was in the main room, not his office. That was the first difference. He was sitting. She'd rarely seen him sit in the common spaces of the house, had come to understand that he moved between his office and his room and the kitchen with the purposeful efficiency of a man who didn't invest in spaces he wasn't using. Tonight he was in one of the chairs near the window, jacket off, the left side of his shirt loose over the dressing on his shoulder. And when she came in, he looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention she'd learned was his equivalent of relief. She crossed the room and put the ledger on the low table in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her face. "Silas?" he said. "With Torres," she said. "Hargrove's office is being contacted." She sat down in the chair across from him, not the one closest. There was still something between them that required a little space, some geometry of unresolved things that needed room. His 2 men are cooperating. They were mid-level, hired for the night, not long-term people. They'll give names and Hargrove will build from there. Matteo nodded. He looked at the ledger again, the leather cover, the handwritten pages visible through the gap, where it hadn't quite closed. His whole life, he said, almost to himself. Right there. 40 years of it, she said. Politicians, city officials, attorneys. Every favor he was ever owed and every piece of information he used to collect it. She paused. It's also going to implicate some of your people, Matteo. People connected to your organization going back years. Hargrove is going to want all of it. I know, he said. That means dismantling pieces of what you've built. I know that too, he said. He looked up from the ledger. I've known for longer than tonight that some of what I've built needed to be dismantled. The question was always whether there'd be something left worth keeping when it was done. He held her gaze. I think there is. She looked at him. The shoulder was clearly hurting. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the minimal movement of his left side, the way he was distributing his weight in the chair to compensate. He hadn't taken anything for the pain, she suspected, because taking something meant compromising the clarity he'd needed for the last 6 hours. And that was the kind of trade Matteo Ravencroft made without apparently registering it as a sacrifice. Your father, he said. He's safe? At my aunt's, she said. He and Marco both. She paused. I told him I know about the recording. Matteo was quiet. He didn't try to explain it, she said. He just accepted it, all of it. I think he's been waiting to stop carrying it alone for 11 months, and some part of him is almost relieved, even though he's terrified of what comes next. She looked at her hands in her lap. He'll need to answer for it. Not to you, to Hargrove, probably. Whatever cooperation Fell gives, my father's involvement will come up. Fell's cooperation is the one that matters to Hargrove, Matteo said. Your father's role was peripheral after the initial contact. Silas used him and moved on. In terms of what Hargrove needs to build the Thrace case, your father is a footnote. A footnote who let it happen, she said. Yes, Matteo said. He didn't soften it, which she appreciated. But a footnote. She looked at the window. The city outside was doing what cities do at this hour, persisting, indifferent, the lights staying on because they stayed on regardless of what happened in the rooms behind them. She'd always found that either comforting or maddening, depending on what kind of night it was. Tonight, it was comforting. You said there was something else, she said, in the facility. You said it wasn't just the recording. Matteo was quiet for a moment. He shifted in the chair and she watched the cost of it move through his shoulder and out the other side. Yes, he said. Tell me. He looked at her with the look she'd cataloged that first night in the restaurant, taking inventory. But it was different now. The calculation that had lived in it then had been replaced by something less defended, the look of a man who has arrived at the point where the defense costs more than it protects. 7 years ago, he said, I was at a street market on the east side of the city, not for business. I went occasionally to places like that specifically because no one expected to find me there, and anonymity had become a thing I valued by then. He paused. There was an accident. A vehicle came off the road at the market's edge. Overloaded delivery truck, lost control on the grade. He stopped again. 3 people were hurt. 1 seriously, a man who'd been walking 6 feet from where the truck mounted the curb. He looked at her steadily. I was the man walking 6 feet from the curb. I was not the one who got hurt. She waited. Someone pulled me back, he said. Before the truck reached the pavement I was on, someone grabbed my arm from behind and pulled me hard enough that I lost my footing and went down on the cobblestone. By the time I'd stood up, the truck had passed through the space I'd been standing in. He held her gaze. I turned around to see who'd pulled me. She understood before he finished the sentence. It was me, she said. You were 23, he said. You were at the market buying something. Tomatoes, I think. I remember the bag. You didn't look at me after I stood up. You looked at the truck, at the man who'd been hit, and you immediately went toward him to help. You were there for 20 minutes, helping coordinate what passed for emergency response in that part of the market before the actual services arrived. A pause. You never looked back at me. Elena sat with it. 7 years. She had no memory of it, not of him, not of the specifics. She had a vague memory of an accident at a market, a bad one, the kind of thing that stayed with you for a few days and then faded because you hadn't been the one it happened to, and life moved forward regardless. She had no memory of the man she'd pulled back. She'd have had no reason to look at him after. Her attention had gone immediately to the one who needed it. You remembered my face, she said. For 7 years, he said. When your father's name came up in the context of the leak and I connected it to the Voss restaurant, I looked into your family's situation and found that the woman who had, he stopped, found that you were still there, still running that restaurant, still holding that family together. He looked away from her briefly toward the window. I want to be precise about this. What I felt when I understood who you were was not, I'm not romanticizing it. It wasn't the reason I came to your restaurant. The investigation was real. The threat from Thrace's organization was real. Your family was genuinely in danger. All of that stands on its own. But, she said, but when I made the decision to come to you with a marriage proposal instead of simply handling the situation another way, he said, the reason wasn't entirely strategic. That's what I tried to tell you tonight in the car and didn't say fully. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You could have told me, she said. Yes, he said. I made it a choice not to. Why? Because it would have sounded like manipulation, he said. You saved my life 7 years ago, and now I'm asking you to marry me. How does that not sound like I'd been building toward it? He turned back to face her. And because I wasn't certain what it meant. I'm still not certain. I've been alone in the way that I've been alone for long enough that I don't entirely trust my own reading of what I feel when I'm in a room with you. He said it without self-pity, flat, factual, the way he said everything that cost him. But I owed you the truth, all of it, and I'm giving it to you now. The room was very quiet. Elena looked at the ledger on the table, at his shoulder, the dressing visible where the shirt had shifted, at his hands, the right one resting on the chair arm, the left one still, conserving energy. 7 years ago I was buying tomatoes, she said. Yes, and you've been carrying that for 7 years. Not consciously, he said, but yes. She felt something move in her chest, not the cold that had been living there since the facility, something different, something that moved the way warmth moves, slowly, from a specific point outward. She didn't perform it, she didn't name it, she just let it be there while she looked at him across the low table with the ledger between them. Matteo, she said. Yes. When all of this is processed, Hargrove, the ledger, my father, the organization, when it's done and the dust has settled, she paused. What do you actually want? He looked at her. The defended quality that had lived in his face since the first night in the restaurant was gone. Not because he'd chosen to remove it, she thought, but because a night like this one took things down to the material, to what was actually there underneath the construction. I want to still be in a room with you, he said. Whatever that room is. She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the ledger from the table, stood up, and crossed to where he was sitting. She set it on the arm of his chair, a deliberate placement, a thing that needed to be held, and sat on the edge of the table they'd just put between them, closer than she'd sat to him in 18 days of living in the same house. Let's get through the next week first, she said. Yes, he said. And then we'll see about the room. Something happened in his face that she'd never seen there before. Not the almost smile she'd cataloged in the early days, not the controlled neutrality, not the recalibrating look. Something simpler than all of those. Something that had less architecture to it. She left him there and went upstairs and sat on her bed and let herself be completely still for the first time in 18 days. The next week was not 1 week. It was 3. Hargrove moved fast once Fell's testimony was on record. The ledger was authenticated, cataloged, and entered into evidence in a process that moved through the city attorney's office with the particular velocity of prosecutors who have been waiting years for something this complete. Fell was cooperative in the way that men are cooperative when the alternative has become very clearly worse than the cooperation. Thorough, precise, giving names and dates and amounts with the accounting accuracy of someone who had been keeping his own parallel records all along out of a habit of self-protection that now turned out to protect him from something he hadn't anticipated. Dorian Thrace was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Elena read about it in the news on her phone, sitting at the kitchen table in the house, and felt nothing dramatic, just the quiet satisfaction of a line being drawn under something that had cost a great deal to reach. Silas Vale was charged with 19 counts, including the attempted murder of Matteo Ravencroft. He gave nothing in interrogation, which surprised no one. He sat across from Hargrove's team with his composed face and his silver hair and his 60 years of carefully maintained surfaces and said words that meant nothing. He would say those words for years, Elena expected. It was the only version of himself he knew how to be. Marcus Fell entered a cooperation agreement. He would lose his accounting license. He would pay significant financial penalties. He would not go to prison, which was a thing Elena had complicated feelings about, and which she eventually made her peace with on the grounds that prison for Fell would not have given her father his restaurant back, or given Marco his ordinary life back, or given any of the families connected to Thrace's network the thing they actually needed, which was for the network itself to stop existing. The network stopped existing. That was what mattered. Her father's involvement was documented and disclosed as part of the investigation. He was not charged. Hargrove held to the material cooperation framework and her assessment that Vincent Voss had been a tool rather than an architect. He was required to give testimony. He gave it. Elena sat with him in the waiting room before he went in, not saying much. And when he came out, she was still there. Her father looked at her in the waiting room doorway with the eyes of a man who had just put down something he'd been carrying alone for 11 months and was learning in real time what it felt like to have his hands empty. "Elena," he said. "I know, Dad," she said. She stood up and they walked out of the building together into the cold afternoon. And her father didn't try to explain himself again, and she didn't ask him to, and that was its own kind of resolution. Not clean, not complete, but real. She reopened the restaurant 2 weeks later. Not the old restaurant. That building had been sold in the debt restructuring, and what was recovered from the fraudulent accounts wasn't enough to buy it back. But a space 3 blocks east that had been vacant for a year, smaller, with better bones, with light from 2 sides, and a kitchen that needed work, and a dining room that smelled like nothing yet, and therefore could be made to smell like anything. She signed the lease on her own. Not with Matteo's money. She'd been specific about that. Had said it once and not again, because once was enough when you were talking to a man who understood the weight of specificity. She signed it with her own savings and a loan from a bank that looked at her restaurant management history and her evident willingness to do the work and said yes. Marco helped her repaint the kitchen. He worked for 3 Saturdays in a row without being asked twice, coming early and staying late, and doing the thorough, thoughtful job of a 17-year-old who has been through enough to understand that certain things matter in ways that had previously been abstract. He didn't ask many questions about what had happened. He asked one on the 3rd Saturday, while they were cleaning brushes at the end of the day. "Are you okay?" he said. She looked at her brother, at the age in his face that hadn't been there 2 months ago, at the steadiness that had come into his eyes, and that she recognized because she'd watched herself develop the same steadiness in the same way through the same process of events that weren't supposed to happen to a person his age. "Getting there," she said. He nodded. That was enough for both of them. Matteo came to see the space on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the opening. He came alone. No security, no car waiting, walking in through the unlocked front door the way ordinary people walked into restaurants, which was not a thing she'd ever seen him do before, and which struck her, in a way she didn't examine too closely, as a kind of statement. He stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at what she'd made of it. The warm light, the repainted walls, the tables she'd sourced from an estate sale and refinished herself over 2 weekends, the menu chalked on the board behind the bar in her own handwriting. "It's good," he said. "It's not done," she said. "It's good," he said again, and there was a quality in it that she'd learned to recognize as his version of certainty. Flat, undecorated, the thing he said when he meant it completely. She was behind the bar, running a prep inventory, and she kept her eyes on the clipboard while she said, "How's the shoulder?" "Functional," he said. "That's not the same as healed." "No," he said. "It's not." He moved further into the room, looking at the details. The photograph she'd hung on the east wall, her mother's original restaurant captured in a frame from 30 years ago. He looked at it for a long time. "She built something real," he said. "She did," Elena said. "So are you." She set the clipboard down. She looked at him across the dining room, the distance between them, the tables between them, the specific geography of a space that was entirely hers and that he was standing in as a guest. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you told me, about the market." He was quiet. "I don't remember you," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I've tried to place it and I can't recover a face or a coat or anything specific about the person I pulled back. I just remember the truck and the man who got hurt." "I know," he said. "So for you it was 7 years," she said. For me, it was 18 days. I'm aware of the imbalance, he said. I'm not saying it as a complaint, she said. I'm saying it to be precise because you're precise, and I think we should be precise with each other from now on if we're going to be anything. She picked up the clipboard again, held it. 18 days was enough for me. That's what I'm telling you. Matteo looked at her across the dining room. She watched the thing move through his face. Not performed, not managed. Real, in the way things were real when a person had stopped protecting them. He crossed the room. He stopped at the bar, on the other side of it, the customer's side, the natural order of where he was and where she was. And he put both hands, carefully, on the bar's edge. The marriage agreement, he said. I know, she said. I had it voided 2 weeks ago, he said. Legally, any obligation you had under it is gone. She looked at him. You could have told me that before now. I was waiting, he said, to come here. To your space. Not my house. He held her gaze. The first time you made a decision about me, it was in my house, at my table, under conditions I created. I didn't want the second one to happen that way. She looked at the bar between them, the wood she'd stripped and refinished herself, that smelled of varnish and the specific exhausted satisfaction of labor completed. She put her hand on it, next to his. Not touching, close. What are you asking? She said. Nothing, he said. Tonight I'm not asking anything. Tonight I'm standing in your restaurant and telling you that whatever you want to build here, he paused. I'll be in the room. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached under the bar and produced 2 glasses and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for the opening. And she poured and she slid one glass across to him and she picked up her own. Opening's Thursday, she said. I know, he said. I'll need someone to run the door, she said. I can't be in the kitchen and the front at the same time. I have no experience running a restaurant door, he said. No, she said, but you're good at reading rooms. Something moved in his face, the full version of the thing that had been almost smiling at her for 18 days, no longer almost, arrived at last and unmistakable. Yes, he said. I am. They stood on either side of the bar with their glasses and the restaurant around them, the chalked menu and the warm light, and her mother's photograph on the east wall. And outside the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday night without reference to anything that had happened or been resolved or survived in the past 3 weeks. Thursday came. The restaurant opened at 6. By 6:40 every table was filled, and Marco was bussing them with a competence that surprised even Elena, and her father was at a corner table with a cup of coffee, and the specific look of a man watching something be rebuilt from something he'd broken, which was not a comfortable look, but was an honest one. Torres came in at 7 and sat at the bar and ordered the soup, which was her mother's recipe and which Elena had made herself that afternoon with the same particular attention she brought to things that mattered. At 7:30, a woman Elena didn't recognize came in alone and sat at the last open table and ordered from the board and ate with the focused appreciation of someone who cooks herself and knows what she's tasting. On the way out, the woman stopped at the kitchen pass. Elena looked up from the stove. The tomato base, the woman said. What's in it? Time, Elena said. Mostly time. The woman smiled and left. At 8 o'clock, Matteo was still at the door, greeting people with a minimum of warmth that was somehow exactly right. Not cold, not performed, simply present. And Elena watched him from the kitchen pass and understood that the man who had walked into her family's restaurant 43 days ago with a marriage contract and a city's worth of secrets had become, in that interval, the person she'd have trusted with her door regardless of everything else. She went back to her stove. The night ran until 11. When the last table cleared and Marco had gone home, and Torres had said goodnight, and her father had kissed her cheek and walked into the cold with his hands in his pockets, Elena stood in the empty dining room and looked at what she'd made. Matteo was at the bar. He'd stayed without being asked, which she'd noticed and not commented on, and he was cleaning glasses in the specific inexpert way of a man who has never cleaned a glass in a professional context and is figuring it out as he goes. She watched him for a moment from across the room. He set the glass down, picked up another, and said without looking up, "Stop watching me." "I'm not," she said. "You are," he said. She crossed the room and took the glass out of his hand and set it on the bar and looked at him. "Go home," she said. "Your shoulder needs the rest." "My shoulder is fine," he said. Your shoulder has been telling everyone it's fine for 3 weeks, she said. That doesn't make it fine. He looked at her. She looked at him. The restaurant was very quiet around them, the warm quiet of a closed room that has had people in it all evening and is settling back into itself. I'll go, he said, if you answer something. What? He reached into his coat pocket. He produced a folded piece of paper, a single page, worn slightly at the fold, like it had been carried for a while. He set it on the bar between them. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Open it, he said. She opened it. It was the marriage agreement. Or it had been, the same document, her signature still visible at the bottom, but drawn through with a single clean line. And beneath her original signature in Matteo's handwriting were 6 words. This was the wrong beginning. She read the 6 words twice. Then she set the paper down very carefully on the bar and looked at the man across from her. The controlled face with the full version of the thing in it that had been arriving for 43 days. The tired eyes. The careful way he was holding the left side of his body to compensate for what was still healing. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, what? Yes, she said. It was the wrong beginning. And? He said. She picked up the paper and folded it once along its original crease and put it in her apron pocket. And beginnings, she said, are not the whole story. She turned off the bar light. She turned off the kitchen light. She moved to the front door and held it open, and the cold city air came in with the sound of traffic, and somewhere distant, a siren, and the ordinary ongoing noise of a place that didn't stop for anything. Matteo came to the door. He stopped beside her. They stood in the doorway of her restaurant on a Thursday night in November, the city doing what it did in front of them, the warm dark of the dining room behind them. Thursday was good, he said. Thursday was very good, she said. She locked the door. They walked out into the city together, not holding hands, not yet, the space between them still carrying the memory of everything it had held for 43 days, but narrower than it had been, and warmer, and closing at the particular pace of 2 people who have both, in their different ways, learned not to mistake speed for arrival. The city held them the way it held everyone, indifferently, completely, without knowing their names, and they walked